Hi, I'm Nelda Lentz, and I am the person in yellow in Poolside Gossip, the photograph of Slim Aarons. And you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guile. A few weeks back, during Modernism Week 2025 in Palm Springs, George and I recorded interviews with some of the most interesting people around. Modernist authors and experts, poolside at the swanky U.S. Modernist Compound, aka Hotel Skylark. Today we explore architect Richard Neutra with guest Raymond Neutra of the Neutra Institute and Catherine Meyler, owner of a celebrated Neutra house in Palm Springs. Back in the studio, we'll hear about Neutra's VDL house in Los Angeles from Executive Director Noam Saragosti, Neutra's sadly destroyed Maslon House from filmmaker Scott Goldstein, and special guest Louis Prima and the Witnesses. Heading up the U.S. Modernist delegation to Modernism Week, about 40 people this year, it's the ambassador of appetizer dinners.
Yum.
Your host, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Thanks, Tom. When in Palm Springs, I'm on the Mermaids Plan. Remember Cher, who played Mrs. Flax in the movie Mermaids?
Yes, I do.
With those delightful daughters and that closing scene in the kitchen set to the tune If You Want to Be Happy, Mrs. Flax could only cook appetizers, much to the chagrin of her daughters. But in Palm Springs, it's an art form. You can easily appetizer your way to a full meal, no problem. Go to parties, get invited to parties, buy tickets to parties, and just start with a few olives, a wedge of brie, a sliver of manchego, some bruschetta. Advance to smoked salmon, tomato and basil, mini quiches, bacon-wrapped dates, bacon-wrapped scallops, bacon-wrapped anything, really, mushroom-infused flaky crusts, artichoke hearts, tiny cauliflower, marinated in lemon and garlic, and the dips, wow, onion, hummus, and a surprisingly addictive spinach and artichoke concoction. Your friends will ask, of course, is this dinner? Yes. Like dancing is just sex set to music, appetizers are just tapas while standing up. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Raymond Neutra is architect Richard Neutra's youngest son. In the early 1960s, his father launched the Neutra Institute for Survival Through Design, later led by Raymond's brother Dion Neutra. In 2019, Raymond took over leadership of the Institute with a mission to preserve Neutra buildings and extend Neutra's design philosophy. Catherine Meyler is a Neutra fan, and in 2000, she saved one of his most important homes. Richard Neutra's 1936 Meyler House was falling apart in Palm Springs after years of neglect. Since Catherine's intervention, the house has received Palm Springs Class 1 Historic Site status and is on the National Register of Historic Places. The Meyler House was Neutra's first design in the desert, created for Grace Miller, a St. Louis widow, starting a new life as a dance and wellness instructor. Neutra's progressive ideas and the subsequent light-filled house were a perfect fit for Miller's new venture. Here's our conversation with Raymond Neutra and Catherine Meyler.
You can't be in Palm Springs during Modernism Week or any other time without hearing the name Neutra. It's not Neutra, it's Neutra. And with us today is Raymond Neutra, who is the son of the architect Richard Neutra. Hi, Raymond. How are you?
I'm great, and thank you for pronouncing my name right.
I bet you hear it wrong a lot.
It's not Freud, but Freud. I mean, it's not
right.
Neutra, but Neutra.
It's Neutra. It's Neutra. And you have been involved with propelling your dad's legacy from childhood. I know the other day at the star ceremony for Beth Harris, you said that you had stayed in the Kaufman House when you were 11. Is that right?
It's true, yeah. It was 75 years ago that I had my 11th birthday.
In the Kaufman House?
In the Kaufman House, yeah.
With the Kaufmans?
With the Kaufmans. I'll be showing a picture in my talk.
That would be 1950, I think.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. It's too bad you couldn't do it with Barry Manilow later on. That would have been an entirely different experience.
I think so.
And Catherine Meyler is a Neutra owner. She owns the Grace Miller House, which was from 1937, right? And you have been steward of that for how long?
25 years.
25 years. What is it like to be a Neutra homeowner?
It's a wonderful way of living because it's so perfectly tailored to a certain way of life, which suits me down to the ground.
Mm-hmm. And how much time do you get to spend out in this house in Palm Springs?
I'm there most of the time.
Most of the time
Yeah.
now. Okay,
About
wonderful.
5 days a week
Because you have a business in L.A.
in LA,
Scouting for locations for film shoots.
representing locations.
Okay.
Oh, so you're on the other side of that deal.
Now, Raymond, your father came to this country, and did he initially work for Wright, for Frank Lloyd Wright?
He arrived with $47 in his pocket. He had a friend from Vienna who preceded him there that found a room that he could live in. And he quickly found a job as a draftsman with an architect and made enough money so that he could get to Chicago, where he wanted to meet Louis Sullivan and was hoping to work for Wright. There had been a whole correspondence from Germany facilitated by Schindler with Wright. He had hoped originally to go to Japan and help out on the Imperial Hotel there. Wright was distracted, and he only met Wright at Sullivan's funeral and was invited to come and visit Taliesin. But meanwhile, he was working for Halliburton and Root in the design of the new Palmer House Hotel. And he started writing this book about American building technology that would be called Wie baut Amerika, How America Builds. And my mother came alone to Chicago, or came to New York, really, leaving my older brother with her mother. He was just a baby. Then they got on the train and went straight to Taliesin East and spent a week.
Spring Green, Wisconsin.
Right. They hadn't seen each other for a year. She was 22 or something like that. My dad was 8 years older. So a month or two later, my father actually made an agreement with Wright to come and work at Taliesin, and he spent about half a year there. Work prospects were not good, and Schindler invited my parents to come and live with him at Kings Road and thought that there would be things that he could do. And so in February of 1925, they arrived at the station in Los Angeles, and Schindler picked them up and brought them to Kings Road. And my dad quickly got a job with an architect in downtown L.A., so he had a job designing Spanish Revival houses.
Sure.
And he and Schindler worked together. They got a job with a speculator to design a number of apartment houses, and one of them, the Jardinette, was actually finished, I think, in 1928, and it is being restored right now. It will become affordable housing
Really?
in Hollywood.
Wow.
And then, of course, he got this job with Philip Lovell for the Lovell Health House, and that, too, is being restored. So 5 years after he arrived, a lot had happened, and Schindler had a very productive separate career during that time as well. So we're planning a event on May 4th at the Neutra Alexander Studios that the Neutra Institute owns, with Todd Cronin talking about what Schindler had done, Barbara Lamprecht talking about her supervising the restoration of Jardinette, and Frank Escher talking about his restoration of the Lovell Health House. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my dad's writings and about the importance of the Schindler's hospitality in making these 5 years possible. And then the next weekend, there'll be an event about co-living then and now. And I think Francis Anderton is going to be involved in that, and some Schindler scholar talking about the attempt at co-living at Kings Road.
Oh, that'll be fascinating.
Co-living meaning cohabitating, but not in a relationship?
No.
Well, kind of.
Couples being together or having multiple families in a space.
Oh, okay, multiple. Okay.
Sharing certain facilities like laundry facilities and
Right.
cooking facilities and maybe a common room
Okay.
and things like that. Yeah.
That's how I lived when I was 25.
Yeah. Right.
I can relate.
That's how my wife Peggy Bauhaus, and I are in a continuing care retirement community. So we share laundry rooms with other geezers in the in the compound there. Yeah.
Now, Catherine, when did you get your house, and how did you come across it and decide to buy it?
I bought it in September of 2000. I had known of its existence since about 98, I think, when somebody drove me past. And then I inherited a small amount of money and was looking for something to buy, and knew that the guy who had bought it a year prior hadn't really done very much to it at all. And the idea of being able to own a Neutra house was just
Unbelievable.
a dream.
Right.
And how long had he owned it? Do you know?
He only owned it for a year.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. He flipped it.
He flipped it. And before that, it had gone into disrepair through various previous owners.
It had really fallen apart at one point, right?
Oh, yeah. It
Yeah.
was uninhabitable completely when I bought it. It was the local crack den. So I called him and asked him if he wanted to sell the house, and he was delighted, which should have been red flag number one.
I
Which,
bet.
of course, went completely over my head. So I had a 3-month escrow and spent that time doing some research. And I'd never owned any property before. I'd always been very poor all my life. And so I just thought, well, other people restore houses. Beth and Brent restored a house. I can do this. It's not a very big house.
Yeah, how hard can it be, really?
Exactly. So I went forward. And I've been doing it for 25 years, a little bit at a time. I had to get it to code within a year because
Okay.
I couldn't get a mortgage on the house. So I got a private mortgage, which was very expensive, and within a year got it to code so I could move in and get a real mortgage.
Okay.
So I just spent that year removing everything that had been added on. I had to replace all of the plumbing because the tamarisk trees had infiltrated all of the piping.
Oh, yes,
And there was a
right.
tamarisk tree growing out of the toilet.
Oh, my
And-
God.
The roof leaked, so I had to have a new roof. There was no air conditioning, so I had a whole air conditioning system designed. So there were no vents in the main room. I wanted the main room to look almost exactly as it had originally. So we designed a system where the ceiling is an inch short of the wall on one side, on
Oh,
the
so the air
western
sneaks
side.
out of the
So you
edge.
can't really see a vent, but it comes out. And then the return is hidden under a daybed on the opposite side.
So how hard could it be?
Pretty hard, actually.
yeah.
It's a lot of work that goes into that.
And so after I'd got it to code and moved in, I'd run out of money. So then my business was doing well, so I would just save up over time and do another bit and then do the same again and the same again. And that's what's still happening to this day.
Catherine, I know that you've read a lot about the house and about the relationship between Mrs. Meyler and my dad. She was very engaged with the design, and my father was very committed to paying attention to what the client needed, but he also had strong aesthetic commitments. Did you come across any conflict of where she wanted to do something else and he put his foot down and said, we've got to figure out another way to reach this, but it can't be that?
No, I think the closest that they came to that sort of situation was when she requested that the ceiling be raised by about 6 inches. And he said, well, that's going to change all of the windows and we'll have to rebid everything because it would alter so many different parts of the plan. But she was firm, and he went away and talked to the contractor and eventually came back and said that they could do it. And that seemed to be the only time that happened. I mean, she made him redesign the house 8 times
Okay.
for various reasons. And every time she wrote back and said, we can't have this because, one time it faced northwest. And she said, well, that's where the wind comes from. So you don't want to have it facing the mountain. So he turned it around. And there were various different iterations. When she wrote back and criticized them, she was very focused. She knew exactly what she wanted and why she wanted it. So she could explain very clearly to your father why she wanted it this way and not that way. And some of it was to do with the way the studio was going to interact with the rest of the house. So when it wasn't in use, it could become part of her space and not a dedicated space that was never used for anything else.
And she wanted that.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And her studio was for instruction.
Yes, she had learned how to teach the Mensendijk series of exercises.
And what is that?
She had learned it through Bess Mensendijk, who she met, I think, in Scandinavia. And it's a way of performing exercises very much for people with scoliosis.
Oh.
The way you move and the way you interact with situations during the day, that you should always be upright and elegant. It was a form of elegance.
Yes. A little bit like Tai Chi in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
right?
it sounds yoga-ish.
Are there any Mensendijk practitioners today, or has it completely disappeared?
I think it's completely disappeared, but occasionally I do get people asking me more about it, if I know any more about it. So there seems to be a resurgence of interest, certainly.
What was Palm Springs like in 1937?
Well, the reason she cited the house where she did was because she was hoping to pick up clients from either the Racket Club or the El Mirador Hotel, which is where the Hollywood crowd was staying. And those were the people she had targeted as potential clients. But what she didn't really understand was that the Hollywood people who were coming out here were coming here for fun.
Yeah.
And they weren't really interested in some fancy exercise program.
Yeah.
So it didn't really pan out the way she was hoping it did.
And how long was she there?
She only was there for 4 seasons, I understand. And she would come in October till April, I think.
Okay.
But because the practice wasn't really working, she couldn't afford to keep it up.
And then the war was,
Yeah.
by that time,
Yeah.
the war had started.
And the army took over the house.
They
Oh,
did?
the army
for a-
took over
yeah,
the
for a
house.
few years. And she came back, I think, in 47, and it was just trashed.
So she
So
still
she
owned
sold
it
Yes. Yeah.
up until 47?
Yeah.
Oh.
And then she sold it to Charlie Farrell from the Racket Club. And he used it as an annex for his guests.
Do you know why she chose to have a screen porch when there really are hardly any insects here at all?
I think she saw it because she loved being outdoors. But because of the climate, that's not always possible to be actually outdoors. So this was a sort of transitional room where, because it faces south and east, it would be protected from the wind. So you can sit in that space, be a little bit shaded, and have no wind.
But the screens
Yeah.
don't add anything to that. She could have had that porch without screens.
She could.
Had she come from
don't
some
know.
other part of the country where
Yeah, same
St.
way.
Louis,
bugs
Missouri,
fly?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it also, if you had nothing there, you'd feel more
Exposed?
exposed. In those days, there was nothing there. Even though the screens are screens, they do give you a sense of a little bit of privacy, a little bit of protection.
Do you
Somewhat
spend
second.
time on that porch?
I do, yeah.
What time of day and what do you typically do out there?
Mornings, at certain times of year, sit and have coffee and just look out. There's a lot of bird life there and animals that I like to sit and watch the birds and listen to the birds. And then at the end of the day, to sit and have a cocktail at the end of the day. And the way the light changes through the day is lovely. And at a certain time of day when the sun's just gone, or before the sun goes, it's a beautiful space to be in.
Catherine, besides your house and the Kaufman House, are there any other Neutra homes in the valley?
No, the Maslon House was built in the 60s on Tamara's Golf Course, but was unfortunately demolished.
And there's a new movie out about that, I believe.
Yes.
It's going to premiere
Yes.
at Modernism Week.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating story. I remember talking with your brother Dion about that because he was very involved and I think wrote part of a book about the Maslon House?
That's right. He wrote a biographical book and had some memories about that particular house.
The Maslon House was in the same family of the Maslons for a long time. And then one day a new buyer came along and told everybody that they were just going to preserve the house and everything was going to be fine. And then very shortly after it closed, they tore it down and flew back to Minnesota and eventually built something else on the spot. And still, it's not quite known why this all went down. Do you have any idea?
I just heard a rumor that they had actually known the Maslons and there was some animosity, that this was sort of an act of revenge. But I don't know that for sure. But I forget.
They were from the same town. The Maslons and the Rotenbergs were from the same town in Minnesota. They knew each other. Little palace intrigue there.
Yeah, really.
Raymond, you have your institute, which is working to preserve not only your dad's legacy, but also the principles of survivability, moving forward. Tell us about that.
So my dad founded the Institute back in 1962, and he was hoping that his reputation would somehow be used to promote current practitioners that were aiming their designs at people and aiming their designs at environmental sustainability and aiming at people that were doing research about those two things to increase the chance of doing things right. And he had written this book, Survival Through Design, where he talked about his hypotheses about the effects of the built environment on the brain, how we were approaching the built environment, and showing some examples of research on what worked and what didn't work. When he published that book, by and large, lay people were kind of intrigued by it, but architects like Philip Johnson would say to him, "Richard, this is not architecture, what you're talking about."
Yeah.
And some fear that it would become designing by the book, or where was the room for artistry if you're going to have all this research about what works and what doesn't work. So when he died in 1970, my brother Dion took over the Institute. It was pretty inactive, really. It was mostly about him trying to preserve the legacy and some publications and things like that. Then towards the end of his life, he asked me back on the board, and because there's been a whole resurgence of neuroscience and architecture, that I thought, let's explicitly have a mission that adds that. And so we really have two missions, and they're aimed at different audiences. The preserve and share the legacy with the goal that more people will be delighted by the designs. And then the other goal is the original goal, which is to somehow use this legacy to promote today's people that are artfully designing with the idea of people and the environment. That's a more challenging goal, and I was talking to my friend Natasha Drabe in the Iconic House Network and say, can you think of any other historic house where that kind of mission is going through? And not really. So what we've been doing is we have 3 Neutra-designed apartment-containing structures in the Silver Lake district of L.A. One of them is completely rented out. Reunion House, where my brother used to live, has one little apartment. We use part of it to offer a free year-long residency for master's students in architecture at USC. And so we're trying to be helpful to their career. And
this is all adjacent to the well-known VDL house.
That's right. You're in an immersive environment which is potentially educational.
Do you feel like your father's recognition of this effect has finally found an audience many years later?
Well, I think that other people do things like that, but what was different about him was he was very curious, and he says, I sense that this works. But why does it work?
Yes.
And now people have done more research. One of the things that we do to promote today's researchers is to offer our buildings as subjects of research. And there's a researcher named Christy Munn whose research is about special goggles that know where your eye is looking. And so she took photographs of this bedroom and photoshopped it in different ways and got people to rank them as to spaciousness.
Yes.
But she was also seeing where the eye was looking.
Right.
And what she found was that the eye went to the corner of that spider leg outside the envelope of the house and was kind of registering that as the border of the space, which of course made it about 5 feet longer.
Bigger in the experience of it.
In the experience. And then the Neutra Alexander office holds 70 to 100 people, and we've been having events there. One that we did in cooperation with the LAAIA was a presentation by Dr. Esther Sternberg, who's been studying stress hormones in different architectural settings, and she's written a book called Well at Work. So these are the ways that we're trying to use the legacy to be helpful to today's practitioners.
Now, you're the second generation Neutra. Are there third generation Neutras on deck that are really interested in this?
My kids and Dion's kids are sympathetic and interested, but they have their own lives, so that if this thing is going to be sustainable, we're going to have a succession plan. And the way I look at it is this second mission is sympathetic to Neutra, but isn't about Neutra. It's about what he cared about. And there are people who care deeply about designing for people in different dimensions.
Yeah.
There are people who are passionate about the environment, and there are people who are passionate about researching it. And so we need to find those partners and get them occasionally. Affiliation with us would be helpful. And then you've been helpful in receiving the documentation of the destroyed Connell House in Monterey. So there are a lot of people pitching in, and we need an executive director that is great at continuing those relationships and continuing these programs and then dreaming up other ones.
Catherine, as you look ahead for your house, is there somebody kind of lined up that just has to have it when you want to sell it?
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment?
Not at the moment. I'm enjoying it too much.
Yes.
Now,
yes, indeed.
Is it protected from demolishment?
Well, technically, yes. I mean, it could be demolished, but it is protected locally. It's a Class 1 historic site.
Okay.
And it's on the National Register.
Was that hard to get, the Class 1 designation?
No, the Class 1 wasn't hard to get. Barbara Lamprecht very kindly wrote up the application for the National Register and spent a week at the house asking lots of questions and making sure there was the right percentage of original fixtures and fittings and materials. And it passed the test, so...
Good.
But there's no covenants on it or easements that would prevent a demolition at the moment, right?
No.
Okay, all right.
I inherited the Kelton triplex where Tom Hines lives.
Yes, sure.
Yeah. And I paid to have a facade easement with the Los Angeles Conservancy. So they own the surface of the house, and that means that my two East Coast sons will inherit it when I die, and they can either decide to keep it or they can sell it with the security that it will be very difficult for someone to scrape it clean and build a 5-story apartment there, which they well could.
Raymond, Catherine, thank you so much for spending time with us. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
We were speaking with Raymond Neutra and Catherine Meyler. Architect Noam Saragosti is director of the Richard Neutra VDL House in Silver Lake. He and his partner, Juhi Park, worked together to make VDL a welcoming place for architecture, art, culture, and education. Saragosti graduated from Cal Poly Pomona.
Go Broncos.
With a BA in architecture and earned a master's in architecture from Harvard.
Go Crimson.
In 2018. The 1932 VDL House can be visited in person or explored virtually at neutra-vdl.org. Here's George's conversation with Noam Saragosti.
Noam, when we had on your predecessor, Sarah Lawrenson, she told me a story about how years before she became director of the VDL House, she actually snuck in one night and just fell in love with it. So I'm wondering if in your career you've snuck into any modernist houses.
I can't say that I snuck into any modernist houses. I wish I had a great story, but no, I was always pretty polite and waited for an invitation. I remember that somebody told me a few years ago that there was a zine which had the title something like How to Break into Modernist Houses. And I think the Neutra VDL was on it. That was a story they told me. I've never seen it, but
Oh, wow.
But yeah, I would like to get a hold of that zine.
Fortunately, the VDL house is open to the public. There are tours and other special events. How long has the house been available for people to tour?
So you mentioned my predecessor, Sarah Lorenzen. She started the tour program, I believe, about 10 years ago. And I used to be a docent here when she was the director. So I remember giving tours around 2013. Ever since then, the house has been open to the public on Saturdays. So there's the public tours, and then we also do community programming and events, exhibition openings, performances, different lectures.
When the VDL house was created, it really was designed to be this experiment for living. And I know a question I get asked a lot is, what are the kinds of experiments that Neutra was doing? What was he testing out with the house?
So the house was built in several phases. The first house was built in 1932 with some seed money from a Dutch philanthropist named Van der Loo. And Neutra, because it was his own home, I think had a little bit more room to experiment. So one of the things he experimented with was how to pack a lot of small spaces on a pretty standard, typical LA lot, 60 foot by 70 foot, which were both private and public spaces. So there were spaces for the family, kind of domestic living spaces, but also working spaces. You know, this was very, very efficient. At the same time, he wanted to show that you could make the spaces feel generous and not just purely functional and efficient. There's also the experimentation with the use of technology in the domestic space. Behind me, where I'm sitting at the VDL house in the kitchen, there's a built-in blender, a built-in can opener. We have these big louvers on the house that used to be mechanically controlled. So the integration of technology was really important. I think in terms of materials and kind of detailing, the house is pretty experimental. You can also see it in kind of comparison to some of Neutra's other houses. Richard and Dion together, they took a lot more liberty with kind of testing things out that they wouldn't normally do in other houses. And I think all of that lends itself to a kind of idea about dematerialization, that the house and all of its glass and mirror surfaces, including the water reflecting pools, create this kind of atmosphere, which is very special if you've ever been to the house.
I have been to the house, and it is a really special experience, particularly to see how every angle of the house is kind of a different viewpoint towards the middle of the house and to the sky and to the nature all around. How many visitors do you get a year?
We get about 100 visitors every weekend on a Saturday, plus or minus. That also doesn't count all the visitors we get for the public events that we do. So yeah, we get quite a lot of visitors, and there's so many layers of different people who are interested in the house. There are people who have lived in LA many, many years and have never been. There are people who travel from abroad. There are people with different interests. Of course, we get a lot of architects, but also people who are interested in fashion and art, all kinds of different people. So it's really great.
The VDL house is part of what's known as the Neutra Colony, right? Which is a series of homes in Silver Lake?
Yes. So the VDL house was built in 1932. It was the first house here at the neighborhood by Neutra. And he really loved the proximity to downtown and the proximity to the Silver Lake Reservoir, which at the time extended all the way to the road here. So that park, that beautiful park we have now across the street, was not there. And he operated out of this space for many years and lived here. And at some point, he met a developer in Puerto Rico. He was doing some work there and discussed this opportunity to buy 9 lots here down the street from the VDL house on Silver Lake Boulevard and develop them as Neutra houses. Generally, around that time, there were these covenants and laws that would prohibit non-white families from purchasing lots and building homes. And Neutra thought that this would be an opportunity to develop some homes for Asian American families and other people who wouldn't be able to normally buy lots anywhere in LA. And built 9 houses from, I think, around the late 40s to the early to mid 60s.
The Silver Lake area, beyond the Neutra grouping of houses, is also packed with modernist houses. What do people see when they ride around the neighborhood?
So the Silver Lake neighborhood is very eclectic in terms of the architecture. There are a lot of different types of homes and different varieties of single family and multifamily housing. We're very lucky that, Neutra decided to settle here in the neighborhood and also had very talented architects work in his office, like Gregory Ain, Harwell Hamilton Harris, Rafael Soriano, amongst others. And many of them built here in the neighborhood. So down the street from us, like you said, we have the Neutra Colony, 9 other Neutra houses. Across the reservoir, we have houses by Schindler. We have apartment buildings by Schindler, houses by Gregory Ain, Harwell Hamilton Harris. Down the street from us, we have a Gregory Ain apartment building called the Avenel Apartments.
Oh, yeah, right.
Across the reservoir, we also have another house by Gregory Ain that Escher Gunwardena recently restored. We also have a lot of other beautiful houses that are not of the modernist idiom. So a couple doors down from us, there's a beautiful pink house that looks like it could be in Mexico or French Normandy style house. And they all live really beautifully here in Silver Lake. We're very lucky.
When people come from all over the world to visit the house, what do you think fascinates them the most?
Yeah, I should develop some kind of survey to gauge people's reaction after they come for a tour. But what I generally gather from visitors is that they're really struck by how well this house does in our climate. In other parts of the world, having a house with so much glass and openings would be challenging in terms of climate control. Here, we can have all the doors and windows open during the tours, and people can kind of freely walk from inside to outside. And the house feels good. It feels, kind of natural. Of course, they love learning about all the details about, the piano legs or the louvers and things like that, which might stick in their memory. But I think generally the kind of adaptation of modernism to our climate in Southern California is one of the most profound takeaways.
And you do a number of events at night. I know Victoria Lautman has done several talks there. What kind of speakers have you had come through?
We generally have architects who come give lectures here. We recently had a lecture series called Soft Landing, in which we partnered with the LA Forum for Architecture and Urban Design here in LA. And we paired young architectural practices together to have a conversation about what it means to build in LA today, differently than how it was for architects trying to do experimental work like Neutra and Schindler back in their day. And that was a set of 5 conversations. We recently also had an educational workshop residency with 2 architects from Germany and Switzerland, Oliver Luchens and Sebastian Molter. They came and lived here in the house and conducted a workshop with our students from Cal Poly Pomona. After the workshop, they gave a big lecture and we had a reception. And usually when we have lectures, the VDL doesn't have one large space that everybody could occupy at once. So we kind of make do in the courtyard, and we have people sitting on different platforms and rooftops and some in the garden, and it creates a really kind of cozy atmosphere. We had Barbara Kasten do a book talk a couple of years ago. We try to make it varied, but generally with a focus on architecture.
Now, this house is what, about 80 years old, 85 now?
Yeah. First built in 1932 and then burnt down in 1963 and rebuilt in 66. So yeah, there's kind of several layers to it, but yeah.
What do you have to do to keep it maintained? I know with all those windows and the older materials, there must be some maintenance you've got to do.
Absolutely. I liken the house to an old person that constantly needs love and care. And so one of the things I try to do is to do preventative care and try to keep all the surfaces and try to notice any cracks or things that might become bigger issues later on. The roofs have been something that we've been constantly dealing with. So a couple of years ago, we totally resealed all the roofs. And this year, we haven't had any issues with the rains, which has been great. Paint is a big thing for Neutra houses, especially in this house. There are so many different paint colors that just become worn out over time. Glass, we have so much glass around the house. It's something that we try our best to kind of keep clean and managed. Those are the kind of main things.
What tends to age or break the most? Is it the wood that goes or the glass? What do you have to keep your eye on the most frequently?
I would say waterproofing is the main conundrum we have here. And even in the correspondences that you would read between Dion and Richard when the house was being worked on, because as you know, they worked on the house collaboratively. For example, on the second floor, we have a balcony that's open to the elements with this beautiful yellow tile. And Richard said, what are you going to do about waterproofing here? And one of the correspondences, when you have rains and you have winds at the same time, the winds will carry the rain into the balcony and there's nowhere for it to drain. And not surprisingly, that's one of the areas that's compromised when we have rains that kind of wash into the balcony space. The water goes into one of the tracks. And so that's something that before the rain, I have to protect that area. And we're kind of working on a longer term solution for that. The garden house where I have the fortune of living, this part of the property is a little bit older. It's from 1939. And so also the waterproofing is the main issue. And as you probably know, if you don't take care of the waterproofing, that can cause other problems down the line. So, corrosion of wood and mold and all kinds of issues. So that's the biggest hurdle, but we take care of it. We manage it.
It sounds like a lot of work, but it really is a two-person job, and you have a very special person helping you. Tell me about her.
Yeah, so my partner, Juhi Park, she was also a student at Cal Poly Pomona with me and a docent at the house around 2013. We have a collaborative practice together called On Studio, and she's also a senior associate at Scott Mitchell Studio. She lives here with me at the house, and we share many of the responsibilities of taking care of the house, which includes all the cleaning and maintenance, but also programming, preservation, special events. And yeah, I wouldn't be able to do this without her. She's an integral part of the team. So her and I really kind of manage everything very similarly to my predecessor, Sarah, and her husband, David. Like you said, it's really a two-person job. So I'm very fortunate that Juhi helps me out with the house, and she's really fantastic.
So in this love story, Noam, which came first? Did the house kind of pave the way for the relationship, or were you already together by the time you were docents at the house?
We were already together when we started as docents here at the house in 2013, but it was very early in our relationship. When we were students at Cal Poly also, we were very lucky to have Sarah Lorenzen as our professor while she was the director. And she came up with a studio for us to design different installations around the house. So Juhi and I actually got to spend a lot of time in the house, and we also got to spend the night at the house once, which was really like a dream for us as students. And when I started teaching at Cal Poly in 2018 and the position opened up in 2020, Juhi and I were both very determined to apply and to see if our relationship with the house can keep developing. And so, yeah, I almost feel like you called it a love story. It's really Juhi, the house, and I all together.
Do people want to get married at the house?
I know that a colleague of mine, Jia Gu, who's a former director at the Mack Center, got married here. And Raymond Neutra also sent me a photo once of him getting married. I think they were up on the bridge on the second floor. Those are the only two recollections I have of weddings here at the house. I have gotten people asking to take engagement photos and things like that. But yeah, we don't typically rent the house out to people for, weddings and events like that.
Yeah, I imagine because it's such a delicate house too.
Exactly. We rent the house out for photo shoots in order to fundraise for the house. So that helps us on top of the fundraising for the tours. Because like we discussed earlier, this house requires constant care. And so the photo shoots for fashion brands really help us out. A lot of fashion brands really take interest in the house, and it truly is such a photogenic environment. So that does help us out quite a bit.
The website is neutra-vdl.org. That's Neutra- V as in Victor, D as in David, L as in Lima.org. And you can find more information about the VDL house and how to go on a tour. Thanks so much for talking with me, Noam.
Thanks for having me, George.
George was speaking with Noam Saragosti of the VDL house. Scott Goldstein is a filmmaker whose latest project, Preservation Mirage Presents Richard Neutra's Maslon House, explores the tragic demise of Neutra's masterpiece, the 1962 Maslon House in Rancho Mirage, California. Destroyed in 2002, the house created a larger conversation about preserving architectural landmarks. Scott knows this house well. His grandparents lived across the street. Here's George's conversation with Scott Goldstein.
Scott, the word Maslon in Rancho Mirage is kind of like Gettysburg or Fort Sumter. It's a word that evokes a certain moment in time. In 2002, that you have covered in your documentary. I know when I go out there and I say the word Maslon, people are galvanized. They have an opinion, they have a story. So take our listeners through this. The Maslon House starts off as a very famous house by Richard Neutra.
The Maslon House was commissioned in 1960, finished in 1963 by Samuel and Luella Maslon. It was at the convergence of the 12th and 13th fairways at Tamarisk Country Club on a street called Fairway Drive that's actually behind the gates. They worked with Neutra to create what Brad Dunning calls posh living on the links. They had built-in barbecues, immediate access to the pool, walls of glass to look at the mountains. It was really a beautiful residential pavilion. I spent most of my life, my early life, looking at it. During the summers when I visited my grandparents, and in the spring, there was this long, elegant roof line that seemed to float above this house on the fairway that was juxtaposed against the mountains, against the green. And it was, for me and a lot of people, a catalyst for appreciating modern architecture, whether it was while the house was still there or after it was destroyed.
Your grandparents lived across the street, right?
That's correct. Well, across the fairway.
Okay. And did you ever go over there as a kid and get to see it yourself?
I did. My grandfather was maybe one of the most sociable people that ever existed. So I got to see a lot of these houses on the 13th fairway, especially his neighbors. The Maslon House, I got to visit the Robbins family from Baskin Robbins. It was pretty great.
German chocolate cake, my favorite.
They had a soda fountain. I had remembered 31 flavors, but then I talked to a member of the family and they said, no, there were only 6. But when you're 5 years old, even 6 flavors is a lot.
Yeah, it really is. Now, the Maslon House, Luella Maslon outlived her husband.
Correct.
And towards the end of her life, I guess resisted several attempts to preserve the house or landmark it or make it historical in some way.
There's been so many stories, so it's hard to figure out what's Bubba Misa and what's truth on some of these things. But, it didn't qualify because it wasn't even 50 years old when it was demolished. So it didn't qualify for the National Register of Historic Places. At the time, there were no real preservation codes in the city of Rancho Mirage.
Okay.
The city was very young at that point.
She didn't want to put a preservation easement on it or anything like that?
We did not see anything like that, no.
Okay. And so it went on the market, and what happened next?
So it goes on the market for $2.45 million, which is a lot of money for a house, especially in 2002 in a place like Rancho Mirage. There wasn't a huge amount of demand. There wasn't a large awareness of mid-century properties at the time. But $2.45 million was a lot. It's certainly more than the land value would have been.
Mm-hmm.
So you would expect someone who paid $2.45 million for a house like that they would want to preserve it.
And it got a lot of potential buyers, right? I mean, it was shown a lot.
That was the word. I think, again, we think about $2.45 million in terms of a California house in the year 2024, and it doesn't sound like a lot, but $2.45 million was a large amount of money
Huge.
For the area at the time. Really, I mean, I think you could have bought a house across the fairway for about $500,000 at the time.
So the house sold, and I guess this was early in 2002?
Early in 2002. I believe it was February.
And it was sold to an attorney from Minnesota?
Correct.
Okay.
Richard Rotenberg.
All right.
I believe that's the proper pronunciation.
And at the time, I read there were statements from the Rotenbergs that, they were going to come, they were going to live there part of the year, house is fine, all these assurances that it was going to be okay.
Yes. I believe there was some conversation about they were going to do some slight renovations, but mostly in keeping with the house. This is all alleged. Yes.
And then what happened?
The contractor came into City Hall to get a demolition permit, and the house was razed with, this is sort of funny. Sometimes we talk to people and they'll say they got the permit on Friday and they tore it down on Saturday. Other people say they got the permit and they waited, but they got the demolition permit and they, without fanfare and without a warning shot, tore the whole thing down.
And any idea why?
You have to understand that, especially in Rancho Mirage, it's a young city. You're on your really third generation of homeowners in some cases. Like my grandparents' home is on the third generation now, and that's after being built in the 50s. So This is still a youngish community. I have had people tell me, oh, that's where Chico Marx lived. And I say, actually, he was the only one of the Marx brothers that didn't have a house in Rancho. And they say, you're crazy, get out of here. So the stories, you sometimes have to filter through this game of telephone. I've heard all kinds of theories, and I just want to clarify for legal purposes, these are all alleged. But yes, I heard that they may have known each other.
Who knew who here?
I believe the new owner knew the Maslons. I know they were both attorneys from Minnesota. That is the extent of my willingness to delve into the intrigue. You have to wonder, it is not a normal thing to pay a premium price for what is really a contemporary treasure of Western architecture, and then you tear it down. You could have bought an acre or 2 acres of land for much less money. So maybe there was something personal. I don't know what would drive a person to do such a thing. To imagine any kind of petty rivalry or disregard for history, both architectural and personal, I'm at a loss. I'm at an absolute loss to imagine why somebody would do such a thing unless they had too much money and too much time on their hands to think about revenge. I don't know. And nobody is really able to tell you that. If you talk to 5 different people, you might get 5 different answers as to why this happened. And again, I read in the LA Times, and it's mentioned in the most recent Desert Sun article, that the new owners sold the lot before even building on it. But to my best of my knowledge, they still own the property.
Has anyone asked Mr. Rodenberg about this recently?
We did not. And maybe that's to a fault for us. But I just didn't want to open up that Pandora's box. This is a short subject documentary. I will admit I wanted to focus on the positive elements. I wanted people to appreciate, understand the house. I think it's more important for people to have an emotional connection with the house and just be disturbed that anyone tore it down. And in the end, it doesn't matter why he did it as much as how it happened. So our interest in the film is to inspire people to protect what's there. I don't know why he would do such a thing. I think objectively tearing that house down for whatever purpose it was torn down is objectively an architectural and historical tragedy.
Right after it was torn down, Brad Dunning, noted designer, did an article in the New York Times, which got wide readership. And this really galvanized the community to start thinking about preservation.
When you're living in a community, they called it Greater Palm Springs or Palm Springs, and then technically it was unincorporated Cathedral City. And then in 1973, it actually becomes a city. So you're talking about a city who still had its original inhabitants. By 2002, you have a mixture of the first generation that really lived there and the second generation coming in. There was no codified history. There was no written history. It's all sort of oral. You have this house that's behind gates, so not everybody really gets to see it. Thanks to Adele and David's book, Palm Springs Modern, you really get a glimpse behind the gates, right? In 1999, they photographed this house. They tell the story of this house. So it's fresh now in the consciousness of people. Now people are like, oh my God, I didn't even know we had this treasure in the community. Brad has a brilliant gift of making you care emotionally about inanimate objects. And I don't even want to call it an article. It was almost an essay. It was a call to action. It was a call to awareness. Most people didn't know what they had in their own community. You just look at these houses that were built, and I mean, most of these houses were built in a period, especially in Rancho Mirage, between like 1952 and 1972, right? And then they fall out of favor, and everybody starts building 7,000 square foot houses with high ceilings and lots of bedrooms for the grandkids to visit.
Yeah.
So, you really didn't have any awareness of mid-century in Rancho at the time. PS Modcom was really beginning to flourish in Palm Springs proper, and they were doing incredible work. And, this sort of catalyzed PS Modcom too, to be like, hey, there's more than just Palm Springs. So yeah, this happens. And all of a sudden everybody goes, wait a second, we're actually sitting in a living museum here. We have these untouched gems and there's no protection on them. So the city jumps into action. Brad's piece in the New York Times just grabs international attention and really sparks an emotional reaction. This isn't just a cerebral hey, this was a architectural treasure by a legendary architect. It was more like, this was a home where people lived, a cultural hub. This is a significant piece of architecture that not only speaks to the skill of the architect, but it spoke so much to the community and of the people who lived there that it became a very visceral and emotional thing. And the city then commissioned Peter Maruzzi to lead the architectural survey. And when you see the architectural survey of Rancho Mirage, it's a thick, thick book. It's thicker than a phone book.
Yes.
And you realize that you are in a living museum. And the residents of Rancho Mirage and the city of Rancho Mirage became the unwitting curators to this museum. And it was this moment that catalyzed the movement.
PS ModCom stands for the Palm Springs Modern Committee, a preservation organization. You're also part of a more local preservation organization, Preservation Mirage, which has helped produce this film.
Correct.
How have they worked since the Maslon House to save other houses?
Well, so Preservation Mirage started out, Melissa Ritchie, who wrote the book Mod Mirage, started this organization, which was sort of a loose conflagration of homeowners, and has slowly evolved over the last decade into a fully functioning 501c3 with a working board. And they have raised awareness around mid-century. They brought it into the consciousness of the population of Rancho Mirage and really made it a point of pride for many residents. I encountered them because when my grandparents' home was on the market, it was held in trust for the 6 grandchildren, and my grandfather's attorney wasn't crazy about my grandmother, never named a successor trustee. So it was under the auspices of First Chicago, which after several bank mergers became JP Morgan Chase. They just kind of let the house sit there for months, and we kept taking care of it because we were like, this is a family treasure. We love this home. It's a significant architect. It was Val Powelson and Bob Marks built it, part of their Marval homes that they built on Tamarisk. And the real estate agent that they hired put it on Zillow with only exterior photos and said, 1959 original, bring your ideas and your contractors, that kind of listing.
Oh, yeah, tear down.
Well, we were panicked because, this was our family home. This was a place where we celebrated, where we loved, we laughed. My grandmother lived until she was 103 in that house. And Preservation Mirage got on the internet, took pictures, said this is a 1959 jewel box, a Goldstein residence jewel box on Tamarisk Lane. And they put pictures and videos online. And luckily, unbeknownst to us, we already had people that were 1 degree removed from us, friends of friends that were looking to restore the house as opposed to tear the house down. But it was a real long process, and it really made me appreciate that if a house like this could go through that, a house that was cared for, a house that was loved, just imagine a home where there's no awareness. So that's how I fell into the orbit of Preservation Mirage through that. But the group had been doing such good work over the years cataloging this town and becoming not only a group that looked out for architectural preservation, but also the social histories, and became almost like a social club as well. So now we have a large membership. We have a great relationship with the city. We have multiple events. This is our first foray into filmmaking.
The film is going to debut at Modernism Week in February 2025. And then are you going to try to put it on the documentary film circuit?
I'd love to put it out to film festivals. I would like to keep doing these. I think we have an incredible collection of homes and various clubs and people. I think there's a really interesting history in Rancho Mirage. So we'd like to do more of these. I don't know where it ends up. We kept it short so that it could be potentially broadcast on PBS or a local channel.
Sure.
And because this is where it starts, you have to understand the Maslon House in order to look at the rest of the history of Rancho Mirage.
What replaced the Maslon House? Was it another modernist house?
I wouldn't call it a modernist house. It is a large house. It has sort of a pale pink color to it. It's not open very often. I've only seen someone there about once a year. Usually around springtime, you see the chairs by the pool, the shades are up, and someone's playing basketball on the tennis court.
Okay.
But it's a house.
Okay.
It is a house. It is a. I will say it is a home. It has four walls, some windows. It has a roof. It has a driveway, garage.
And the T-shirt reads "Damned with faint praise."
Yes, it is a home. You see it in the film at a certain point.
The movie is Preservation Mirage presents Richard Neutra's Maslon House. Scott, thank you so much for talking with me.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
That was my conversation with Scott Goldstein.
You couldn't walk through Las Vegas in the 1950s and 60s without wanting to see band leader Louis Prima. He and his then-wife, singer Keely Smith, were the stars of a strip, the same time as Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Sammy Davis Jr. With his band The Witnesses at the Sahara and the Desert Inn, Prima's well-known songs include Angelina, named after his mother, Just a Gigolo, and I Ain't Got Nobody. These hits helped him land a gig performing with Frank Sinatra at the 1961 inaugural gala for John F. Kennedy. Prima and Smith divorced later that year, and in 1967 he landed a role in Walt Disney's The Jungle Book as the orangutan King Louie, singing I Want to Be Like You, one of my kids' favorites. Even though he doesn't appear in the film, Louis Prima's visit to a small Italian restaurant in New Jersey drives the plot of the 1996 film Big Night. Great movie. His rendition of Pennies from Heaven was featured in the 2003 Christmas blockbuster Elf. Louis passed away in 1978. Following in his father's footsteps, today's guest, Louis Prima Jr., learned drums from his mom, Gia Malone, and piano from his aunt, Sister Mary Ann. Later in high school came trumpet, a popular Las Vegas band called Problem Child, opening for heavy metal bands, of course, then the reformation of the Witnesses, which have been going strong ever since. In 2012, Louis Prima Jr. released Return of the Wildest, and in 2014, the album Blow, which was recorded in the same recording studio his parents used. Welcome, Louis.
Good morning. How y'all doing?
We're doing good. Thanks for coming on with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
My first memory of Louis Prima was as a child. My parents and I went to see Ocean's 11. And in the scenes they do where they show all the old hotels, which are all gone now, up on the boards, they had Louis Prima and Keely Smith.
Right.
They had what was essentially a residency, we call that now there, right? They were there for years and years.
Back in that day, entertainment was a staple there. You know, the lounge music was not the lounge music of the Bill Murray Saturday Night Live skits. It was entertainment and a place to get away from gambling. Of course, you know, gambling was the number one thing in Vegas, but the break to get away was the stars that played in the lounges. But that started with my father. It was 1954. My father could not get work in Las Vegas. The big band era had dried up. He went to, I want to say his name was Frank Trotter, but I probably have the name or the person wrong. But he went to the Sahara Hotel and kind of begged for a job and said, give me 2 weeks. I'll play in the corner. Just set me up in the corner. Give me 2 weeks. So you don't have to pay me. But if we're successful, you got to pay me after that. He didn't have a really good band, and he called down to New Orleans, and his brother, Leon Prima, who ran the 500 Club that they owned on Bourbon Street. There was a young saxophone player that had come through and played. He was actually playing for strippers, believe it or not. Sam Butera.
Wait a second. They had saxophone players in a strip club?
Oh, absolutely.
I think sax is a very sexy instrument.
Oh, yeah, it is. And look, Sam played it sexy, the best sax player in the world. But Leon sold his brother, my dad, on Sam Butera and said, you got to check this cat out, blah, 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 blah. So when the opportunity arose, he called Sam and said, hey, Sam, grab 4 guys, come to Vegas. We're going to get some work. This was, I believe, the day before or 2 days before Christmas. And Sam was like, I got a family, well, you know, can it wait? My dad said no. And the rest is history. If you look at the early pictures of the Casbah Lounge at the Sahara, they literally were playing in the corner of a room. There was no lights. The ceiling was low. And my father knew how to entertain. And he took what was a place to drop your wife off when you went to go gamble, or a place to go sit and have a drink in between, you know, table games. He turned it into an entertainment spectacle because people in droves came to see him play. And that's what spawned, all the great lounges. I mean, the McGuire sisters played there. You could just list name after name of people that lived in the lounges and provided excellent entertainment opposite the headliners. And kind of the rest is history. That was, the third incarnation of my father. And, it fueled the whole resurgence of himself.
I mean, he was already a successful musician before he ever set foot in Vegas.
Absolutely. He was huge when he first went to New York in the 30s and sought after and was in movies and selling out clubs, owned his own club on the West Coast. And then the big band era hit and he switched gears and had one of the most successful big bands of the era. And I think that's one of his brilliance was the ability to quickly change himself for whatever the time was. When the 70s hit, they all pasted on sideburns or grew them and they were doing rock and roll. I tell people all the time that if my father was alive, in the 90s, he would have been doing rap music. And Kanye West put an album out with another rap artist, Kid Cudi. It's called Kids See Ghost is the song. And they sampled my father's Christmas song, What Would Santa Claus Say?
Oh, I love that song. When he finds everyone swinging.
They sampled it. It's like one of the key things in the song. And not only did they sample it, but they had the forethought and gave my father a writing credit on the song. So absolutely, my father was doing rap.
Wow, awesome.
Yay for lawyers.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, yay for lawyers. Woohoo!
Every once in a while. Good Lord.
Yeah. Well, let's hear a song from your group, Louis. This is New Orleans.
They say you can't go home, no, the feelings are strong, and I'm caught somewhere between. Well, now the Bon Vivant are calling to say they're having a ball. They're second line swinging, the Yap Pack playing to the max, they're raising the walls. 'Cause it's a long way to New Orleans. I left my heart there because it seems I go back every time. I feel alright and my rock is ready to roll. And it's a long way to New Orleans. I'll do my time there because it seems I know that every night will be alright. And my heart is ready for soul. I never thought life could be so simple, 'cause every day there just seems to be a wrinkle. So I'll pack it all in a traveling bag and I'm gonna say bye-bye. But it's a long way to New Orleans. I left my heart there because it seems I go back every time. I feel alright. bring it on home. Feel alright, be alright, come on. Alright, baby. Alright, back home. Gonna get back. I wanna get back. But will you take me back? Oh, I'm ready for some soul now. Come on and take me back. Come on now. So that every night it feels alright. I wanna be alright. It's gonna be alright. It's a long way to New Orleans. Come on now.
It's kind of a sing along.
That's how you end a song.
Yeah. You stop. That's great. Who's singing? Is that you?
That's me.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, sir.
You got some chops.
When I was in high school and learning all the music and all the instruments, and I decided I wasn't very good at a lot of them and didn't want to get into music at all until I sat in with a friend's band, sneaking into clubs when I wasn't old enough in Vegas. And he pulled me up on stage because I was always the guy standing on my car singing in the parking lot before school. And I sang Walk This Way from Aerosmith, and it stuck with me. I realized that I don't think it's necessarily good singing. I think it's knowing what to do with what you're doing. I kind of never looked back since. I've had a microphone in my hand since, and love it to death. Thank you for the compliment. I sing with my heart, and I sing songs I believe in, and I think that helps you bring forth emotion, because without emotion, you're just singing notes.
It seems like it's time for a Louis Prima resurgence. It seems to come along every 10 or 15 years. I remember when Brian Setzer covered Jump, Jive, and Wail.
Right.
And I found on YouTube there was even a performance where you guys were on stage together.
Absolutely. That was a joy. I had actually met him back in the rock and roll days, but I think both of us were too drunk to remember. He certainly was. But the girl that sang with me on this album that you just played, the Blow album, was actually one of his vixens, one of his background singers when they do the Christmas tour. We surprised her to go see her perform, and he called me backstage to meet me and couldn't be more of a sweetheart and said, "You want to get on stage?" And I guess he doesn't do that too often, and was scared because he, didn't know if I knew what I was doing. And it was a hoot, man. The crowd loved it. Both of us loved it. It's one of those moments I cherish. As I'm lucky enough to go through life doing what I do. There's a lot of moments like that.
Is there a recording of it anywhere?
It's on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's on
Check it
YouTube.
out.
There's unfortunately they cut off during the banter after the song, which was priceless. But I guess that's one of those, you got to be there. But yeah, my father's music I don't even know if it's resurgences. I think it's always there. I've run into and had the fortune to sit with countless people from the entertainment business, not just music, but TV and film, who cite my father as an influence. I mean, I sat in a bar in an airport talking to Snoop Dogg one day because he knew what the song Sing, Sing, Sing was and knew who Louis Prima was. And you immediately turn into a musical conversation. I think one of the blessings right now is finally my mother's estate has sold off all of the music and the publishing rights to it, and you're starting to see it. They used Banana Split for My Baby during Hard Knocks. It's on a Nissan commercial right now. It's popping up kind of everywhere. You're getting him in the background here and there. They're doing their due diligence in publishing, and I think he'll come out with a big pop, and you'll get him in a movie or two again. And
it doesn't sound like anybody else, so
it is such a unique sound.
When people tell me, when somebody says, "What kind of music did he play?" or "What kind of music do I play?" I go, "Prima music." He really did have his own sound, and it was a melding pot of what he grew up on in New Orleans, which is, they can say it was Mississippi, but I think New Orleans fostered rock and roll more than anybody else. And I say that because I believe rock and roll is an attitude. Look, Mozart was rock and roll because he played with attitude, and he played a little bit stronger and a little bit aggressive than anybody. And that was my father. And, that's certainly what we're doing, because when somebody books us as a jazz band, there's going to invariably be somebody in the crowd that goes, hold on, this isn't, isn't what I expected. But we definitely turned it up on its heels and played to such a diverse crowd, which pays homage to my father as well. I mean, we have fans from 12 to 112, and they come out and help us put on these brilliant shows, because I most certainly encourage people to get out of their chairs and jump around and have as much fun as we are on stage.
Well, let's hear another song. This is Let's Go.
Drop your basket. When you dance, you look fantastic. The way you jump, the way you swing. Come on and dance with me. Let's go. Come on and dance with me. I said if you wanna fly. I said if you wanna fly, let's fly. If you wanna fly, let's fly, let's fly. Come on and dance with me. Well, twinkle, twinkle, stop the car. It doesn't matter where you are. The way you jump, the way you swing. Come on and dance with me.
That is fantastic. Holy cow.
Thank you.
It's too bad you don't have any fun in the studio.
Yeah, really.
Our producer and record label president, Jim Irvin, he's an idiot savant in the studio. He is amazing back there, and he's able to catch all them anytime somebody laughs or says something that you normally would cut out of music. He's able to stick it in there and kind of add to the fun of what we're doing in the studio. So, yeah, it's neat.
Louis, where are you when the Witness is playing in 2025? People can come see you.
You can go to louisprimajr.com. That's LOUISPRIMA junior.com. We're building on our calendar right now. It's been tough since the pandemic to be on the road. And, if you get a chance to see us, please give it a shot. Bring somebody that you don't think is going to like it, because I guarantee they will.
Well, Louis, have you given any thought to maybe walking into the Mirage and saying, hey, if you just give me this dark corner of the room and let me play for 2 weeks and see how it goes?
Oh, my brother, if you only knew. I would love to do that, but I'm a road hound. I really love the road. I'm one of those rare individuals. I'm one of them cats that love being in that tour bus and being in a different city every day and bringing the music to the people. I really, truly enjoy it.
But
I'll see what happens.
Nobody puts Louis in the corner.
That's right.
Not anymore.
Well, if my mom were alive, she would argue it.
Louis, thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate it. I had a blast. Anytime you want to chat some more, I'm more than willing.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs. Okay, Tom, I believe it's time for a martini as we close out the show.
Get shaking, George. Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 25,000 significant modernist houses, and access 5 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl, with guest research by Bobby Morris. Meticulous is her middle name, or it could be Minnie. We really don't know. Still, U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back next week and in 2 weeks with more fascinating guests from Palm Springs. Cheers!
Cheers!